Nobody thought much of it that spring. A 12-year-old girl walking the fence line of a dust-blown wheat farm before school, dragging a burlap sack of seedlings behind her. Her shoes were caked white by the time her father called her in for chores. Her arms were sunburned by Wednesday. By Friday, the neighbors had started asking questions. Delia Marsh didn't explain herself. She just kept walking the line. She'd hauled in bundles of cottonwood and mulberry saplings, thin as broom handles, and she was setting them into the cracked soil along the west edge of the property, one every 6 feet. Dozens of them, all the way from the old windmill to the low-rise where the wheat gave out to native grass. People in Haskell County, Kansas had seen plenty of strange things, but a girl planting a row of trees across open prairie in the middle of planting season, with the wind already stripping topsoil off the North 40, was something people talked about at the grain elevator. If stories like this one, or stories of quiet grit, patience, and real farming lessons mean something to you, hit subscribe and join our growing farming family. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to welcome you. Delia Marsh was the third of 5 children on a wheat and sorghum farm that had been worked by her family since her grandmother's parents claimed it under the Homestead Act. Her father, Wallace Marsh, was a quiet, exhausted man who'd watched 3 straight years of topsoil peel off his fields every time the wind kicked up past 20 miles an hour. Her mother, Opal, ran the henhouse and the accounts, and rarely had a spare hour to spare. Delia was not the one who got noticed at the county fair. Her oldest sister, June, won ribbons for canning. Her older brother, Ross, was the one their father bragged about behind the wheel of the combine. But Delia was the one who walked the property line every evening after supper, not because anyone told her to, but because she liked watching how the land changed. She was the one who noticed the fence posts on the west side, leaning a little more each month as the soil around them thinned. She was the one who found the irrigation ditch half filled with blown dirt 3 days before her father even looked at it. She didn't say much about what she noticed. She just watched, and she remembered. The planting started the March after Delia turned 12. She'd asked her father for permission to work the west edge of the property, the strip nobody used for much of anything. Wallace Marsh had looked at her for a long moment, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and said, "Long as it doesn't cost me seed money." That was all the permission Delia needed. She traded 3 months of egg money and a summer of hired chores for a bundle of cottonwood and mulberry cuttings from a county nursery 2 towns over. When the bundle came in on the mail truck, her neighbor Otis Kane leaned over the fence and squinted at the sticks in her wagon. "What in the world are those?" "Trees," Delia said. "For what, Shade?" "Sort of." Otis scratched at his neck and didn't say anything else, but he told his wife that night that the Marsh girl was out planting sticks in dead dirt. His wife laughed and said that tracked, knowing Delia. Old Hollis Pruitt rattled by on his truck, slowed down, and called out the window, "Girl, you know the wind out here will snap green wood before it takes root. Anything you plant on that rise is going to end up in Oklahoma." Delia nodded and kept setting cuttings into the ground. Her own father watched from the porch some evenings, saying nothing either way. Opal asked her at supper what exactly she thought she was growing. Delia said she'd explain once there was something worth explaining. Nobody pressed her further. That was how the Marsh family did things. What nobody knew, not even Wallace, was where Delia had gotten the idea in the first place. The summer before, during 3 weeks spent with her mother's father, Emmett Voss, out past Garden City, something had stuck with her. Emmett had been a district agronomist for almost 3 decades, One of the men who'd walked half the county during the worst dust years, helping farms hang on to ground they couldn't afford to lose. He was 71, mostly retired, but he still noticed everything. One evening, they'd driven past a neighbor's field that had lost 6 inches of topsoil in a single storm, the surface scoured down to hardpan. Emmett had sat with the engine idling for a while, then said, "You know what would have stopped most of that?" Delia hadn't known. "Trees," Emmett said. "A shelter belt. Set them close, 3 or 4 rows deep if you can manage it, running crosswise to the prevailing wind. Give them 4, 5 years. Once the roots take hold, the canopy breaks the wind before it ever touches the soil. It doesn't stop blowing. It just stops picking the ground up when it does." He'd handed her a pamphlet from the Soil Conservation Service, the paper gone soft at the corners from being read too many times. Windbreak design for Great Plains farms. Delia read it twice on the bus ride home. What Emmett had described was documented, working science, the same shelter belt program that had reshaped whole counties after the Dust Bowl. Rows of cottonwood, mulberry, and Osage orange, planted tight and perpendicular to the wind. Slow surface wind speed dramatically at ground level, keeping loose soil from lifting in the first place. The roots hold the soil in place directly, but the real work happens above ground, in the wall of branches breaking the force of the wind before it ever reaches bare earth. Delia understood it the way a girl who walks fence lines understands things, not as a theory in a pamphlet, but as something that would matter someday. The first year was hard on the saplings. A late frost in April killed off 1/3 of the cuttings outright. A neighbor's cattle got loose through a gap in her temporary fencing and trampled 8 more before she found the damage the next morning. She repaired the fence and replanted with fresh cuttings, rooted in coffee cans of water in the mudroom. In June, grasshoppers stripped the new leaves down to stems. She saved what she could. Some she lost anyway. Otis Kane drove by again in midsummer, saw the thin, patchy row, and shook his head out the window. Might as well have stuck fence posts in the ground. He didn't say it unkindly. There were evenings Delia wondered if he was right. The saplings that made it through the frost stayed spindly and slow. A dry, windy August cracked the exposed soil around their roots. 2 of them near the low end simply browned out and died. She pulled them, replanted with cuttings from the survivors, and packed the dirt down tight around each one with the flat of her boot heel. Her brother Ross watched her one afternoon and said, "You know it's just a row of sticks, right? The wind's going to do what it's always done." Delia didn't answer. She kept packing dirt. The second year went better. The saplings that survived the frost pushed down real roots. By midsummer you could see it, a thin but thickening line of green cutting across the brown of the west field, leaves shivering sideways in the wind that used to blow straight through. Still, most people in the county didn't think twice about it. The spring Delia turned 14 followed the driest winter anyone could remember. Then, as if making up for it all at once, the wind turned hard and steady for 9 days straight in April, gusting without letting up. The kind of wind that doesn't just blow dust around, it lifts whole fields into the sky. Old Merle Yates, who farmed the section 2 miles north, told Wallace at the co-op that he hadn't seen a blow this bad since the 50s. Wallace drove the property line that evening and watched dust rise off his own unplanted fields in long brown curtains. The meadowlarks had gone quiet 3 days before it hit hardest. Delia had noticed that too, though she hadn't said anything, and she'd walked her shelter belt line twice the day before the worst of it, running her hand along the trunks, feeling how they'd thickened, how they no longer bent at the first gust. The county issued a dust advisory that Tuesday. Wallace taped it to the kitchen window. The family ate supper with the shades drawn, listening to grit tick against the glass. It hit hardest on a Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, 3 neighboring farms had lost inches of topsoil off their open fields, dirt piled in drifts against fence lines like dirty snow. Otis Kane lost most of his newly seeded East Quarter, the soil simply gone, carried off in a haze that turned the sky the color of weak coffee for 2 days. Hollis Pruitt's irrigation ditches were half filled with blown dirt, machinery buried past the axles. The county road between their farms stayed closed until Friday, visibility too poor for trucks. Merle Yates lost a wheat planting he'd put in only that March, the young shoots scoured clean out of the ground. But on the Marsh farm, the west field held. Not perfectly, dust still drifted along the open rows further out, but behind the shelter belt, the soil stayed largely in place. Where neighboring fields showed bare, wind-scoured dirt, the ground behind Delia's trees showed intact soil, a little dusty on top, but whole. The reason was exactly what Emmett Voss had described that evening near Garden City. The rows of cottonwood and mulberry had grown dense enough to break the wind's force before it reached the ground, dropping its speed at surface level enough that the loose topsoil never lifted at all. It wasn't the roots doing the work this time, so much as the canopy overhead, a living wall standing between the wind and the field. Nobody made a speech about it. Otis Kane came by that Saturday to look at what was left of his own East Quarter, or rather, to look at what wasn't gone on hers. He stood at the edge of her shelter belt for a long while, boots still dusty from his own ruined ground. He didn't say much. He asked where she'd gotten the trees. Delia told him about the county nursery and wrote the name down on a scrap of paper from her coat pocket. Otis folded it and put it away. The next spring, Hollis Pruitt put in his own row of cottonwoods along his north edge. The year after, so did Merle Yates. Nobody made an announcement out of it. It just spread the way useful things spread through farm country, quietly, out of watching and needing. Delia Marsh never told anyone she'd known it would hold. She didn't need to. The field said it for her. There's a line often repeated among old plains farmers that the land doesn't forgive neglect, but it remembers care. Delia hadn't set out to prove anything to anybody. She'd been trying to protect a strip of ground nobody else thought was worth much, on a farm her family had scraped a living from for 3 generations. She'd learned from someone older that the wind will always blow, but the ground doesn't have to go with it, not if you give it the right defense and enough time. The trees are taller now, thick enough that you can't see through the row anymore from the road. That's not a metaphor. It's just what a shelter belt does once it's grown in. And sometimes, the most sensible thing you can do looks like a waste of good seed money right up until the wind picks up. Thanks for reading. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from.